Hi, welcome to KBtime. I'm your host, and today we're going to be discussing the Double Loop, Raging Wolf Bobs, the Wave, Turtle Beach, all of that. If those are now ping-ponging in your memory banks and you're thinking, I know that, what do I know that from? You know it from Geauga Lake. And I've got with me a very special guest that we never thought we would actually find someone who knew all this, but one of the gentlemen who ran Geauga Lake for almost 30 years, Dale Van Voorhis. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Now, when you folks bought the park in 1969, it had already been there for 80 years or so. What made you decide, and we've talked about this a little bit before, what made you decide we're going to buy Geauga Lake? It was you and I think 3 partners, right?
Right. There was 3 of us. We all worked at Cedar Point.
Mm-hmm.
I had worked at Price Waterhouse right after I got out of graduate school, and my boss at Price Waterhouse happened to live in Aurora, Ohio, and he said, if you ever want to introduce to the owners, I know them. And at Cedar Point, I got to get to know the other 3 fellows were Earl Gascoigne, Gasper Lococo, and Milford Jacobson. And so at one point in time, we decided that we might want to investigate this. Mm-hmm. And so we did. And that started in probably, January of 1968. Mm-hmm. And it took us until October of 1968 to get a deal to buy the park.
Wow.
And the deal was we'd buy $1.5 million for $1.5 million. We'd put half down. We had to put $50,000 up front as earnest money. And we proceeded from there to find financing. And we used the Ohio company out of Columbus, and we had a small public company that we were floating $1 million bond stock issue that came out and provided us the ability to take over Geauga Lake. And the actual day we took it over was April 1st, 1969.
Pretty good. And the park opened probably like Memorial Day that year,
No,
right?
no. The park opened the last weekend in April.
Oh, very cool.
And we'd been down there working before we actually took over the operation. And naturally, opening day, it snowed.
Of course.
We had about 3 inches of snow in the midway, so we didn't even attempt to open.
No. But eventually, you had a good run of about 30 years. And in that time, you added a lot of things. Talk to me about what the park was like in '69 versus when you folks sold it.
Okay. The entire park was inside the roller coaster, the wooden roller coaster. Mm-hmm. Back then it was called the Cyclone. Mm-hmm. And we renamed it the Big Dipper eventually. But all of it was within. People parked up against, and there's many pictures of this parking lot, up against the roller coaster itself, and the main entrance was underneath the arch of the coaster.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of rides. Mm-hmm. The midways had all been blacktopped by this time.
Okay.
So we didn't have to do any of that. Mm-hmm. The ballroom, which used to be a roller rink, was intact. Mm-hmm. So at the other end of the park, there was 2 rides in the swimming pool that was built in the 20s. Mm-hmm. And that's where Johnny Weissmiller set, I don't know how many records in the 30s swimming there. Yeah. But it'd been filled in such a way that you could put rides on top of it, and you'd walk, instead of up to a ride, you'd walk right straight on.
Pretty good.
And they had games buildings and refreshments and picnic shelters, but it was all between the roller coaster and the lake.
Pretty good. And you could, at the time, if you wanted to, just walk in, and then you paid per ride initially?
That's correct.
Yeah, so you folks were able to switch it to what we all know now, where here you buy your ticket for the day and you can go do whatever you want for free.
Yep.
And there was also, you mentioned the ballroom, there was concerts.
Yes.
Right? You'd have concerts, but then you'd have the big DJ from the AM stations come out, right?
Right.
So how did that attract people and bring them in?
Well, it was Wixie, Nickel Days was an example of one of those. And we had it the first year we were there, and maybe the second year, and then we discontinued it. And it was a nickel a ride. That was the big thing to come and do that. And Larry Morrow, I believe, was the DJ at the time, and he had talked to me a couple times in the 70s, and he said, we had 115,000 people at Geauga Lake. And I kept telling him, Larry, we can't handle 25,000 people, let alone 115. So, and our biggest capacity crowd over the 20 27 or 28 years that we ran a park. We got 31,000 people in the park, and that's after we expanded the park. And we figured if one more person came in, someone had to fall in the lake.
Probably. Was there a special promotion that day, or you just?
No, it just happened to be one of those days that everything seemed to hit.
Everything hit. Now, you were also telling me at one point that, and I remember going there many times for my parents' company picnics, and that was a huge part of the admission, the business at Geauga Lake, was it not?
That's correct. One of our best things that we did to guarantee we had business is we would have group outings, and 54% of our attendance came from pre-scheduled, pre-booked outings. So what this buys you is on a Saturday or Sunday, which is your biggest days, if it's raining, the people come, whether it's whatever the name of the picnic, the illuminating company or whatever it is, because it's just like you going to a Cleveland Browns football game and it's snowing, you're going to go no matter what happens.
Take it that day.
They show up. So we had at least half of our normal crowd pre-booked.
Pretty good.
Now we had to give pretty good discounts for that to happen, but it gave us a steady cash flow as opposed to if we had to go to SeaWorld, they didn't have near the amount of booked outings, and their attendance might be 10% of what they would normally get on a rainy weekend.
And I have more vague memories of SeaWorld than of Geauga Lake, but it seems like Geauga Lake there was more, I guess today we'd call it interactive, more hands-on, more rides, where SeaWorld was more that you're seeing things. It was more like a big aquarium of shows, that sort of thing.
Well, SeaWorld came to the Geauga Lake area, not by accident.
Right.
Earl Gascoigne, who was director of marketing at Cedar Point at the time, was working with George Millay, the founder of SeaWorld, and they had one park out in San Diego, and what they were going to build a second park on land owned by Cedar Point, up near Sandusky. Well, Earl Gascoigne convinced George Millay to come look at what we had and what we had for variety, closer to the express, the turnpike, closer to a major population, and we signed a deal in late 1969, and by 1971, SeaWorld was up and running.
Wow, that was pretty fast.
That was fast, and we had a covenants in our purchase agreement that we would never have any kind of live shows, fish or otherwise, and they had in their covenants they would never put in any amusement park rides.
At SeaWorld, and you wouldn't have shows at Geauga Lake.
Yeah.
Now, and I've always been curious about this. I don't imagine this ever came up, but was there ever any talk of filming, was it Jaws 3 or 4? One of them's at a SeaWorld. Was there ever any talk of doing it up here?
I have not,
No?
not that I know of.
Just curious.
Yeah.
Now, Ohio's become big for tax credits for filming and whatnot, so I didn't know if 30 years ago they said, instead of San Diego, what if we go up to Ohio? But I guess not.
I don't know. It didn't happen while I was there.
No, not while you were there. What was a typical day like for you and your duties when you would get to the park? And we're talking in the summer when the park was in full swing.
Well, I was 27 years old when we bought the park. I was chief financial officer. We were a small public company. I would get there by 9 o'clock in the morning, and the first 2 seasons, that was every day of the summer. I would do a lot of things that had to be finished up from the night before's activity, and I would, as the park closed, I would be part of the group that was counting money, and many times I would get home between 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
And so that my kids didn't know who Dad was in a lot of ways. And at the end of every season that I was there, I took my children out of school, and we went on a vacation together for a week.
That's good. Nice. Do you remember where you went? Any of those?
Oh yeah, we went up to the French River in Canada.
Wow.
Where there was a cabin that we had, what we could use, and that's what we did.
Yeah. So no amusement parks on the vacation.
No. It was solitary confinement with Dad.
I bet they probably needed that. Eventually, you said you were able to bring the kids, and I imagine they must have worked there at some point. And I think you said your daughter's rehearsal dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you brought them into the park somewhat, did you not?
Oh, all 4 of my kids, and I have the oldest is a daughter, and the rest are boys. At 14 years old, they became midway sweeps, and some of them went into the food end of it for a while. Some of it went into games, but they all ended up in the accounting department, and they all learned what Dad did, and whether it was counting money or making entries for bookkeeping, etc. They all learned how that end of the world worked.
Pretty good. And did they all eventually pursue that for their careers?
No.
Oh, not at all.
No, none of them did.
Yeah.
Not that they wouldn't like to, because
Right.
they have lots of good memories of working there.
I'm sure.
And,
So when you worked there, I mentioned some of the rides at the top that were added, some of the attractions. How did you folks decide, Northeast Ohio could use the Wave or something like that? Did you watch other parks? Were there Imagineers like they talk about at Disney, or how did it work?
Well, we would have among the senior staff at Geauga Lake, and when we have more than one park, they would all be included. We would have a 2-day get together, and we would talk about what do we need to do for the next year. And that usually happened in October or November, and we would get down to these things. We added, like the wave pool. I had become the CEO of the company in August of 1982.
Okay.
And I had hired a fellow named Jeff Lococo, who was Gasper Lococo's nephew. But he had worked at Cedar Point. He had worked for Marriott in Chicago at their amusement park. And he was a marketing individual. And he's the one who came up with starting out with Butch High Tide, the water park. And as the water park became very, very an integral part of the park, he and a couple of the other department heads had explored out in Arizona. They had a wave pool like we put at Geauga Lake.
Oh, wow.
And the company that built that wave pool had been sold to a group out of Mansfield, Ohio. And we were their first wave pool after the one out in Tempe, Arizona is where it's at.
Oh, very cool.
And it had been there for 15 or 20 years.
Yeah.
But we had some exciting times. We were first going to make that work pneumatically and open the gates at the bottom of the big tank so the wave would come out under the wall and over a reef and create the wave.
Ooh.
And that didn't work, and they had to go to a mechanical system. And I will never forget it. I was standing up on that wave, or up on the tank, and we made the first wave, and it was a beauty. It was a beauty. And it kept coming and going. It goes to the end of the pool, over the end of the pool, wiped out all the shrubbery.
Oh, no.
And all the freshly laid sod, and it all went into the lake.
Oh, no.
So we had to do adjustments or two.
Yeah, I'm sure. Wow, that was super popular, I remember, and there was commercials and everything. During the time you had, I guess, Cedar Point and maybe Shady Lake would have been the major competitors that were close by. What was the relationship like in staying on top of things and staying competitive?
Our goal was that we would keep our prices for admission to the park at about 60% of whatever Cedar Point did.
Okay.
So we were the low-cost alternative, and that's how we got our group business, and we got lots of people. We would take a look at the industry and see what was out there that was exciting. The Mind Eraser we did not put in. That was after us.
That was after you?
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. But we put in the Bob's Coaster, and that came out of, we got the blueprint for the Bob's Coaster, and it was in Riverside Park in Chicago. And it was built by Philadelphia Toboggan. We got the blueprints for it. And we decided we were going to put the Bob's Coaster in, and it's one of those things that worked out real well.
Yeah, absolutely.
The same way with starting the water park and studying that. We looked at putting a major improvement every other year. The corkscrew coaster. We were supposed to have the very first one.
Yeah.
And thank goodness we didn't. And that's like 1966.
Okay.
And I had gone out to see, they were testing the coaster in Aero Development in California at their plant. They had one up working, and the head of our maintenance department and our operations department, Jim Mickle, and I went out there to see this. Well, I was going to ride the coaster too, but they called me into the office and said, "We got a problem." We said, "We told you it would be $400,000 for the corkscrew. It's now $600,000."
Whoa.
So, long story short, I called my partners and we agreed, no, we don't want it.
Yeah.
Sell it to somebody else. So they sold it to Knott's Berry Farm, and thank goodness we didn't buy it because they had enough trouble with it Knott's Berry Farm eventually had to put over $1.5 million in fixing the corkscrew so it would keep running. And it's only been about maybe 8 or 10 years ago that they went out of, they totally shut the corkscrew down.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
The next year we put in the double looping coaster. Okay, there'd never been a double looping coaster built in the world.
Yeah.
There were single looping coasters, sure, and or things that would take you upside down. I've got a motion picture that shows some of this from 1917, and you would get up on a platform, it was about as high as the ceiling in here, about 16 feet, and you would get into a little cart, and you would go down, and the gravity would take you through the loop. Well, this was at Coney Island, New York, and after the second season, they did away with it because it damaged too many guests.
Oh, wow.
All right? It's the nicest way of saying people fell on their head.
Yeah.
Because they hadn't put underpinning wheels to hold the thing on in case there was not enough weight. But the double looping coaster was a real bonanza for us.
Yeah.
And the same company that built the corkscrew built it. And so we put it up, and that year we had people from all over the world coming to see it.
Yeah.
And then it just expanded, and now you have so many configurations of the coasters, and double looping and corkscrews and butterflies in them and everything else.
All sorts of things.
Sure.
Wow. So all of this was going well and everything, and then the late 90s come, and you decided to sell. Was it an offer you couldn't refuse, or what was happening?
Well, it was 1995 we sold.
Okay.
Okay, and we decided to do that as a member of the board, that it was time to do that. And so we just put it out there, and this group out of Oklahoma City who owned 3 small amusement parks, and they were grossing half of what we were, because by that time we had already bought Darien Lake, we had developed Wyandotte Lake at the Columbus Zoo, and we had Geauga, and we were grossing over $50 million a year.
Wow.
So it was a series of the minnow swallowing the whale, so to speak. And Lowerman Brothers financed the project and financed that company. It was Premier Parks is what the name of the company, and financed that company to buy lots of amusement parks and finally Six Flags. And they bought SeaWorld, they bought the hotel up in Aurora, they bought the campground in Aurora. But after they did all this good stuff, they bought Six Flags and then changed the name to Six Flags World of Adventures, and every park got a different Six Flags name.
Right, yeah. And did you ever go back after you sold to any of the parks up here? You did?
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't bittersweet or anything?
No.
Oh,
no.
Well, that's good.
No.
Okay.
It was sad when they started doing things that we knew they would never get away with doing, and it eventually caught up to them. And one of the things, they let the city buses from Cleveland come into the Geauga Lake and SeaWorld. And we had determined with SeaWorld we would never do that, because we thought you should have your own method of transportation to get there, to be our customer. And so so it was one crazy thing after another they did. And then they tried to go head to head with Cedar Point. Yeah, they put $30 million worth of stuff into Geauga Lake, and they had all kinds of debt. Cedar Point at that time had almost no debt. And you can't go head to head with something like that.
No. Do you think, though, I mean, conceivably, because you mentioned the location, Geauga Lake's a lot closer to a metro area and a big airport than Cedar Point is. So conceivably, it should have worked to try and pump up. At the time, by then they'd combined the parks, I think, Geauga and SeaWorld, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So they'd made one giant park. Conceivably, that could have worked to go head to head with Cedar Point. But why didn't it, in your opinion?
In my opinion, they were trying to get Cedar Point's customer, and Cedar Point had better attractions than what these people did.
I got you.
And they were the roller coaster capital of the world, and that's serious. They've been voted the #1 amusement park in the world I don't know how many times.
Yeah.
And that's sitting right in Sandusky, Ohio.
Not too far.
And it's tough to go head to head against somebody like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Cedar Point was not only drawing from the Cleveland, Akron, Canton market, they were drawing from Indianapolis,
Detroit, Toledo.
Detroit,
probably.
Toledo, Fort Wayne,
Yeah.
in addition to picking people off of the turnpike coming cross country.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point.
They,
Yeah, New York to Chicago, where else are you going to stop? That's a
Right.
good place to stop. Huh. Well, I never thought of any of that. So this is why you were running the park for so long and not me.
Right.
So then eventually, of course, as we know, the history and things wound down, and then there was the water park was really the last remnant. Did you ever go to when it was just the water park?
No.
No, yeah, I never did either. The whole time when you were there for almost 30 years, what are some things, memories that stick out, deals that you made, or you mentioned the wave, but attractions? I know they had the Rolling Stones IMAX film was there at one time.
Yeah.
What are some things that just stick out even now? You think back, you're like, I can't believe we accomplished that.
Well, we started an Oktoberfest.
Okay, I remember
And the year before we started that, I had gone to Germany with my wife, and we were visiting the Oktoberfest. And it was a whole different atmosphere. There they had tents with great big stationary wooden covered entranceways. But inside, you sat in benches like picnic benches, and you went back a little bit, and you were touching the guy at the next table.
Yeah.
It was that close. They had a band that came down from partly on the ceiling of the tent, and it was maybe a 6 or 8 piece band playing German music and polkas. They had a real small dance floor. They had, if the women wanted to dance, and that's primarily who did this, they got up on the tables and they were doing the chicken dance. And all this. Even my wife did that.
Wow.
So, but it was such a good time, and they then a unique atmosphere that we decided we'd try that at Geauga Lake. And well, the first 3 years we didn't make any money.
Was
So
it too much beer? People drank you under the table?
No,
Okay.
no, nothing like that. So I called into department heads at that time and said, okay, if we don't make money this year, it's the end of it. Well, I think they cooked the books.
They wanted to keep it going.
They wanted to keep it going, and it did end up to be a very nice attraction for mid-September.
I remember that.
But we had, there was always something exciting going on, and we had some crazy things. The office, when we first bought the park, was in the center of the park, and it was an old farmhouse. And the wooden roller coaster, and I was in that building, and the wooden roller coaster went right behind my office, about 20 feet away. And it was like a Tuesday night, and it was 1971 or 72, one of the two. And all of a sudden I heard this screeching noise and people are yelling. And I go out and hear the roller coaster track had worn out. And it's only about maybe an inch thick.
Wow.
And it's about that wide. And somehow it worn out. And anyway, we got very lucky. God was on our side. A piece of the roller coaster track had come up through the back seat of the coaster, and it was doing one of these.
Wow.
And the only people in the coaster train were in the front seat, and nobody got hurt.
Oh,
It just
wow.
came to a screeching halt.
Yeah.
Never forget that.
Yeah, I'm sure. And that thing survived until 2-3 years ago.
Yes.
It was so well built.
Well, they built it in 1925, and it opened in it was a Miller coaster. The coaster, and we originally had the books and all the fancy handwriting from that era in the bookkeeping stuff, and it cost $50,000. It was built by the Miller Coaster Company in Dayton, Ohio. And now Dayton, Ohio had the National Coaster Company too at the same time.
Yeah, it was big down there.
Big down there. In 41, there was a mini tornado took down part of the high hill, and it had to be replaced. And then we were there in 1976. We determined something had to happen because it was painted white, and you'd have a beautiful square nut. If you hit the nut with a hammer, the only thing holding the nut there was the paint and something the size of a thumbtack.
Oh boy.
So we totally tore it apart, put in new wood, put in new everything, put it back together, and we had a company. They were in Twinsburg that made special paint for us. Well, the special paint was so good that if you got a nail hole or a screw hole in it, it would let the water in, but not out.
Very good.
1984 or 83, 7 or 8 years, all we got out of it, we had to rebuild the coaster again. This time we didn't paint it, we used pressure treated wood and let it age for a couple of years, and then we stained it, and that's the wood, that's the coaster that was there.
And if they'd maintained it, it would have probably still be standing.
Yes.
Yeah. So, real quick here, we're short on time. The materials, you said you had the ledgers and everything.
Yes.
Where is all that material now?
Before we even sold the park, it disappeared. We don't know whether someone took it or they just threw it out and figured it was old junk. But yeah, we did have that. We had lots of pictures and memorabilia and lots of things from that hadn't been used in years, but they were stuck in the attic of the house, or they were stuck. Geauga Lake had cottages that went all the way around the lake.
Oh yeah.
And and this was prior to the amusement park coming there. There was still 8 of those cottages left, of which there was 4 of them that had people in it, and 4 of them that were just storage areas.
Oh wow.
And they were Sears and Roebuck prefab cottages.
Oh yeah, catalog houses.
And
So some of the stuff was in there, and you must have things at home still.
I have a few things, not
Yeah,
many.
no.
Most of that stuff stayed right with the park because it belonged there.
Yeah.
And,
So someday maybe it'll turn up in somebody's garage or.
the only thing I've got in any completeness is we were a public company from 1969 through December 31st of 1987. And I have all the annual reports that we had to file with the SEC with all the pictures and stuff from each year starting in 69.
All right. Well, save those somehow. Get them preserved. You got to do something with that.
Who knows who will want them?
Maybe someone who's watching this will find a way to preserve them or something.
Yes.
We thank you so much for everything that you did with Geauga Lake. And
well, we had a great time doing it. And I mean, we had a ball. And we had department head parties or staff parties every Sunday night after the park closed. We ate up all the extra food from the weekend.
Oh, wow.
And we drank a beer or two.
Yeah, I'm sure. You have to.
You have to.
Blow off some steam. Yeah. That's great. Well, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
No problem.
Thanks
Good to be with
much.
you.
Want 100 rides?